All right. Well, this has been a long time coming. I'm pumped. We've all seen his account, Andy. Bye bye baby cards. We're going to be focusing in on Barry Bonds because his Bonds collection's insane. But Andy, I want to ask you from the jump, like this. I've been waiting for this moment. Give us a download on the handle. What's the origin of your Instagram handle?
Bye Bye Baby Cards is kind of a reference to well, it is a reference to the Giants, when they hit a homer, sing it Bye Bye Baby, right? So it's a reference to the Giants.
And so you've maybe just to set the stage a little bit about you. I know
Yeah.
you're in the Bay Area, lifelong Giants fan, Bonds fan,
Yep.
early moments. Is that kind of your squad?
Yeah. I mean, growing up in the Bay Area, I mean, we've been absolutely spoiled, right? From the Niners. I mean, we weren't too spoiled with the Warriors. Well, I guess like in the early, Rick Barry days or whatever. But really, yeah, with the Niners and a lot of good times with the Giants. But obviously, those winning years later on with the Warriors and stuff. I mean, yeah, that's of course that's the origin, right? Like how can you not fall in love with some of the biggest names that have ever played any of those sports? And those teams are just, of course, they're going to be, you know, baked in your memories forever.
So with Bonds,
Yeah.
I feel like there hadn't been a ton of conversation around bonds in cards and in the hobby, like front
Mhm.
and center. And then all of a sudden this year happened and you started sharing your collection. And then all of a sudden, like people are like, oh yeah, bonds was really good. And it's almost like people are like criticizing him
Yeah.
for like the steroids, but people are like embracing the nostalgia of bonds. So maybe just before we get into cards and stuff, like talk about what bonds means to you as a fan
Yeah.
and then why you collect them.
Look, first of all, it's hard being a bonds collector, right? And I'm not one of those purist bonds people. Collecting in general, I'm not one of those purists in terms of, um, you know, um, Bonds is better than Griffey or Griffey is better than Bonds or whatever it is, right? I can see it from everybody's point of view, and I can understand why people don't like Bonds, right? Beyond even the steroid stuff, right? Like he has some of the steroids issue, and then on top of it, he has some personality things that people clash with too, right? I mean, come on, man. At least be like like have that, right? So it's hard. It's hard to sort of when you're collecting bonds, that exists and you almost feel that external pressure from other people, right? But I'm not here to like always like just defend Bonds or anything like that. Look, Barry Bonds to me is by far the greatest player I've ever seen, right? I think I can objectively say that. Um, I mean, the style, this hitting, everything. I mean, it was just and I could. It's hard because I'll say also because I'm from the Bay Area, but I feel like objectively, it's hard to ignore what he did from the '80s to the mid early 2000s, and not say, boy, that we saw something that we will probably never see ever happen again, right? And so, just growing up in the Bay Area and everything like that, he brought me so much joy, right? Besides not winning a World Series or anything, but that's okay. But yeah. So, again, it was my favorite player growing up, right? I think he's on the echelon of a Michael Jordan and stuff like that in terms of for his sport. Um, and I think he's just sort of maybe getting his due a little bit more, right? I mean, there was a time, I remember talking to Spinatron about this, that Bonds was more collectible than even Jordan at a time, right? He was considered basically like this is the guy to get, right? So I don't know. I think it always balances out a little bit more, right? But I'm excited to see people like really appreciating Barry Bonds, and I think that will grow as time goes, right? I think that just stems back to the sort of that late '90s steroid sort of era that was completely bastardized. And I feel bad for guys like McGuire and Sosa and all that stuff because, boy, I mean, talk about just absolute joy that they brought, saving baseball too. I mean, and then just for baseball to sort of shove them aside, right? And this is like, drug use and enhancing stuff has been going on for years and everything like that. So it's just unfortunate that, it was sort of really pushed under the rug, I would say. But I'm glad to see that people are sort of like being okay with it, because like shit, that was a beautiful time for baseball. And it was a beautiful time for my childhood. And Brett, I've heard you talk about it. You're like getting into it. Like it's just bringing up all these emotions for you again. Right. So I think that's just what's happening, right? We're getting to an age, I'm 39 going on 40 next year, but you know, we're more financially set. We can sort of buy the cards that we want, right? And at these type of age, and these were the periods when we watched those guys grow up, right? So maybe before most of us were more poor and we didn't have these sort of collections, right? But now, as we're getting to these sort of ages, I think you're just seeing people with maybe a little bit more financial being able to buy the guys that they want to buy, right? And so you're just seeing it sort of championed a little bit more. I think it was always there. It's just, you're right. I have been seeing it a lot more in terms of the appreciation, not just for Bonds, but a lot of those guys that got wrapped up in all that stuff during that era,
When this year, just 90s rare and scarce baseball parallel specifically, it's just there just feels like there's more conversation around them. Their auctions are going for more. And I can't help but like I look at your page and anyone who follows you sees like you don't just collect baseball.
Yeah.
You collect 90s stuff and you've got just an incredible set of cards. How much of like you collecting this stuff, everything happening around where it feels like that category is being elevated, like how much of that, like, do people come to you and ask questions and you interact with other collectors and it feels like it's maturing and growing in real time? Talk a little bit about that.
100%. I can't tell you how many people who I don't even follow message me about different cards from the 90s that like are getting into it, right? For the first time and whatnot. Baseball and football 90s cards have been they're still undervalued. They've been undervalued for years, right? Let's not kid ourselves, right? Initially I wanted to really, I mean, I used to collect more basketball, but really the basketball cards that I wanted to collect is unaffordable, right? And so I went back, sort of my roots were like, dude, you collected baseball and football as a kid, right? And stuff like that. You can find joy in collecting those guys and in the sets that you love and want to collect, right? But anyway, so yeah, so I'm just seeing that sort of that growth that people are contacting me, all my buddies who've been Zan and those guys collecting 90s and different things like that. There's just a lot more heavier discussion around specifically 90s baseball and football right now that I didn't see over the obviously the past couple years, but I mean even probably further than that, right? I'm luckily unfortunate, I'm in a position now where people have sort of seen a lot of the stuff that I post. And so people do come to me with some opportunities as well. I'm not the best seeker of things so much. I have my tentacles out and my people looking for things. My people, like I'm so my people's out there. Yeah, boots on the ground. I got an army of people. But and look, it's getting harder and harder because the value and prices of these things are getting astronomical. And I don't think that's going to change. And also, there's a variety of reasons why that's happening too, right? There's always speculators and stuff in the market as well. But I think it's overall a healthy place for it to be, right? I'd rather have it here than these cards just completely not being considered as highly as they should, right? So I'm happy with the place that 90s in, that the baseball and football 90s are in right now. And I think these cards are going to continue to sort of grow, not only in audience, but in terms of value too. I think these cards are going to be basically the new vintage at some point, really. It's going to be that category, as our generation continues to, build ourselves financially, but also grow older, right? So, yeah.
So we're going to show some of your cards,
right.
But want to ask a timing question before we get into Bond specifically. when we show these cards, people are going to say, you know, this is incredible. I want to make sure we give people some context on like time, like you're actively buying and collecting bonds, but like give us some sort of snapshot on like the time frame of like when you were like, all right, I'm just going to go ham on bonds cards and try to get like acquire the best or a catalog of his best cards. Like when did you start?
Yeah, I would say sometime early 2022, but that focus was a little bit too wide, that net, and even my general collecting style at that time was a bit too wide. Um, it's interesting because you'll look at my page and you'll see a bunch of different sort of guys, and you'll think, man, this guy just collects it all. But there's I like to champion so many different players from that era, right? Like there's just so many great ball players and football players that just don't get enough love. And what I like to do is champion them in the sets that I love, right? So my focus initially with bonds, probably early 222, was really wide, and it kind of started to get more focused in on, I really want to just collect the best of the best, right? And so that was probably 2023, and that's sort of where we're at now. I mean, really, with any guys that I collect, it's kind of that lens at this point in time for me, which is I think that's the I mean, for me, that's where I want to be eventually anyways. I mean, for me, the goal of collecting is to collect the most rare, most special cards of a player, right? So yeah.
You're an interesting collector, and I love how you said like you were collecting so broadly because like
Yeah.
I'll view you as I don't view you while you have one of the best, if not the best, bonds collections I've ever seen. I don't view you just as a bonds
Right.
collector. I view you as a '90s like collector and of specific products that you love because you go kind of high and wide on a lot of different players. So
I've heard,
uh,
I've heard, I've heard, I've heard some comments that like you go to my page, it's almost like a museum of some sort, right? Which is kind of like, it's weird. Look, I'm almost 40, and I'm posting pictures of cards on Instagram. I mean, like, get a life. Not married, no kids. Like, dude, find some other. Those priorities should be probably more ahead of you taking photos of these things and posting it. But I think what the goal with my Instagram is, one day I want to look back and just see this sort of museum of not just Bonds, not just a Griffey, not just Jerry Rice or any of that, but this like just tells a story of an era, with these beautiful cards, right? And I want that to sort of just be displayed like that, right? That's why, while I'll post a Mike Lowell right next to a Bonds, right? Or something like that, right? I think one day I just want to look back at that Instagram page and just see it sort of like that. And so, when you're in love with a lot of players and you're in love with a lot of different sets, it does seem like it's a big haul.
And I love the museum idea. I go and look at it and I'm like, and I've said this and I continue to bring up his name. It's probably because of you, but I'm just like, man, shit. There was like a time where I loved Mo Vaughn. Like I could watch Mo Vaughn highlights every day. I wanted Mo Vaughn's jersey and like guys like Albert Bell too. It's like that guy was like just an angry, mean guy who just hit the piss out of the ball. But you forget about those because there's so many guys and time moves on. And then you look at pages like yours and it like helps you remember
Totally.
that moment in time when you were a fan as a kid.
Perfect, Brett. Nailed it.
All right, let's jump into the cards. Here's a pretty big one out of the gates. So let's talk about the 99 Metal Universe Gym Masters 1/1 MLPD bonds here.
Yeah, and by the way, when you go on my page, it's I don't post like what I recently acquired or anything like that so much, right? My posts I try to stick to some sort of theme with it, right? So some of these cards I haven't even gotten around to posting that I've been sitting on for a year or two, right? But it takes time because I'm trying to curate a sort of a feel for the page, right? I want you to feel something, right? Anyway, so when did I acquire it? I forget when this was it sometime last year? Or was it early this year? Probably early this year. Grant Slayton, Waldorf Stories, he had this card and he came to me and he's like, do you want it? You got, and I was like, fuck, it's like, and it's just like the price tag on it too, it was definitely going to be the most expensive card I've ever spent. Right. And I was going to have to do some consolidating and stuff like that to acquire it. And so I was like, let me think about it. Right. And then like, I'd say 30 minutes. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, Bonds has 3 Gem Masters, right? The base, this one, and I think the Fly, right? Which I own it out of just I don't own the Gem Masters. I own the PMG of the Fly one. I'm just not a big fan of the design of that, but I own it just for completionist sort of thing. But Bonds has 3, basically he has 3 Gem Masters, right? And here's one of them. Never seen the base, probably will never see the base. I don't even know if it exists, right? This is one of his best cards, right? And I actually like, I'm never the biggest fan of the MLPDs, but like I like this look of it. Like he's kind of just staring at you, right? Like, and you're like staring back, and it's like it's almost uncomfortable in a way, right? It's like, you judging me, or am I judging you, or whatever it is? And then you've got this sort of the shimmer effect on it, or whatever, right? That really clouds a lot of things that are going on here, right? Which I think speaks to him as a person and a ball player, right? I think there's a lot of things captured in this portrait that I actually really love about this card. But it's just absolutely unreal to own one of the Gem Masters,
So when you mentioned Grant came to you on this, how important do you think that is to like post your cards and share your passion, and that serving as a magnet for like you getting a at bat at something like this?
Totally. I think it's key. Look, I like to collect in the shadows. That's why I don't even do like these podcasts. That's why it took us.
This took a while, everybody.
A while, just because I'm like, what are you doing, dude? Like, get a life. Like trust me. And I appreciate everything you do. I mean, you are, trust me, what you got going on is fantastic. But personally, besides the public thing I do on Instagram, I like to just collect in the shadows, right? But I think it's important if you are seeking, specific cards, or of a player or whatever it is, to kind of publicly display it, right? Because you may be the best seeker of things. You might be good at going on forums or at shows and finding things or whatever it is. But a lot of these type of cards are freaking buried away somewhere, right? And sometimes they're in hands, big hands, like Grant, who's going to even attract those people who own these rare cards, right? So I think that plays a big role in it. And I've done numerous deals before this with Grant and everything, and he knows my love for Bonds and whatnot. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate him coming to me on this. But I do think that plays a major role, because beyond Bonds, I can't tell you how many times people come to me for everything else too. If they've got 97 Rubies football, or they've got other key things, I think it's important sort of a thing to say, hey, this is what I collect. Please open for business. I mean, you see it. I'm sure you get this all the time too,
Yeah, I think it's just critical to continue to post, especially you have it because of opportunities. This is going to be a little bit like roulette style. I don't know what's going to come up next because I just smashed open all of these tabs before. Okay. But we've got, this one is one of my favorites, the 96 Select Certified Bonds Mirror Gold. I think this card is one of the most beautiful cards you have. Maybe talk about the significance of this set and why you like this card.
I mean, it's the OG sort of sets for like all sets. I mean, first of all, the Mirror Gold, what is that number? It's not numbered, but basically 30 copies of it, right?
Yeah.
But it basically redefined a lot of things for print runs and whatnot, right? And that's, it's interesting because like a 96 Select Certified, before sort of this major wave in collecting that we've seen since I'd say 2019 and beyond. 96 Select Certified, 98 Crusades, even 93 Finest Refractors. Those were some of the most sought after stuff, especially for baseball card collectors, right? And rightfully so, right? But obviously with some changes in terms of like PMGs and Rubies and this things, things have sort of shifted. But this card is absolutely stunning. I think it was in some executives like master set or something like that. That's why it's like probably so pristine. I mean, 9 is the highest grade. I think there's 2 other copies that are a 9. It's just a badass card. I mean, and I think it also just calls back to some of that pre PMG, those type of wave of sort of collecting, what has become maybe a little bit more prominent. But I'll tell you right now that it was not a cheap card either. So the big dogs on the mirror golds, your grip of Jeter's on a different story just because of the rookie thing. But the big dogs on the mirror golds are very expensive. We've even seen more of a wave recently with some of the stuff coming out in terms of some of the prices. But yeah.
So as a high-end collector, when you go, like, I don't if this card was at auction or whatever, but just say like a card of similar status was at auction, do you know the competition that you have on something like this when you're like bidding? Do you have to think about that?
So I'll speak to 2 things. So this card again, Rod, an amazing Griffey collector, he came to me with it, right? But here's the deal: if I pass on it, this thing's gone, and probably
Yes.
there's somebody who would, you just don't see this card, right? And then when it comes to auction, on some of the bigger cards, I would say I have an idea of some people who are maybe bidding on it, but Bonds is such a big name that it sort of transcends into a lot of that cross collecting sort of people. Your big dogs who collect basketball and everything and whatnot. A rare Bonds card is going to be something valuable to them, whether that is as a chip to move eventually one day or something. So I think, it's a little bit different per every player. It's just like Griffey, Bonds, those type of guys, you're competing against a bigger pool of those that have some means,
Is I'm going to try to set you up so you're not like, my guy is the top guy because I have all these cards, but
Yeah.
I want to hear you talk about like the Bonds versus Griffey of it all. It feels like Bonds and Griffey has historically been kind of at the top of the mountain in terms of collectability, but this year specifically, it just feels like Bonds has gained a lot of ground there.
Yeah.
What are you seeing just in terms of prices and demand?
Yeah, I think that gap is somewhat getting closer and closer, which I think is good and should be, right? I'm not going to say Bond should outsell Griffey or, whatever, right? Like they're both beautiful, amazing players, right? I think Bonds is definitely better than Griffey. I mean, I think there's so much likability and stuff with Griffey and that marketable sort of thing, from video games to memorable commercials and stuff like that I think plays a major role in collecting. Because remember, collecting is not always about the best guys selling for more or whatever it is. It's a culmination of like the style of play. But look, I mean, how collectible is Jason Williams in basketball? Super collectible, right? It's not like that guy was just like a 10-time All-Star or whatever it is, but we just love and remember how he plays, right? And that's what makes some of that sort of desirable. So I think Griffey, what he has going for him is a lot of that, right? And I know there'll be people, who'll argue that he's better than Bonds or whatnot. And that's fine, like that's what makes this stuff fun anyways. But I think that's what holds, a lot beyond the steroid stuff. I think that's a major thing that that Bonds has going against them in regards to completely catching up to Griffey, is that, a lot of people didn't like him,
Yes. Likability, Matt.
Likability. I was thinking likability matters. And that's what I was thinking too. Is like, the thing is, like, some people are good at being confident publicly and vocally, and not coming off as sort of arrogant. And I think Bonds just was not perfect at that, right? Like he just, that's his way of probably totally getting in, locked in, right? Like, I'm the man, right? But he just did it in ways that really clashed, I think, not only with the media, but the public and players and coaches and stuff like that, right? So I think that's a skill set that guys like a Jordan have or something, But like, I think if there was that part of Bond's sort of whole package, I think he was sort of lacking a little bit.
I love how in the weeds we're getting on Bonds and the personality type. This is the 98 Donruss Crusade Call to Arms.
Yeah.
Again, another like set that feels like it's growing like gangbusters. Talk about this one.
Which is great. I mean, like, because again, like I mentioned, these Crusades were, at one point the most sought after cards, for baseball players, right? I mean, there's the only thing with Crusades and stuff like that, you've got this is numbered to 25. You've got these like proofs, and there just seems to be a little bit of a gray area, like there's in terms of like not backdoor copies or anything like that, but there's just so many multi layers that some collectors who don't know about the set or whatever it is looking to get in kind of don't know where to begin and which one's most important. But it's a beautiful card. It shines amazing in hand. I mean, all these cards, that's the only thing with Instagram, and that's why I've started posting a little bit more video, is these cards are just absolutely stunning in hand, right? Like I cannot do like this card justice, any of the shiny stuff justice. But yeah, this was even this little print line on it, which my buddy Zan will always give me shit about. Like, I don't care. There's 25 copies of that card. I think that's top grade there, or whatever it is. And it's a card. If you are a Bonds collector, a serious Bonds collector, it's a must have, right? So it's a joy owning that for sure.
What, like maybe 90? This is a 98. This one these have serial number on the back, right?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. I wanted to make sure I had that clear, but then the select certified do not, right?
Right. Yeah. They just basically release sort of the print run of these things, right? And honestly, that's probably what holds back the set a lot, right? Just like any other set, right? When they're not numbered, but we have an idea of what they are. And mainly that's just because, of so much of backdoor stuff from different sets and whatnot. So do we trust the print run or whatever it is? And I think that's kind of what hurts. But I think especially for the bigger players, it doesn't really matter much. That's why you see a Jeter selling for, I think, what did it sell at one point? 250 grand, one of those mirror golds, or whatever. So, and a Griffey would sell, very high too. So, yeah.
Okay. So I thought this was cards I didn't really know much about, but I love the pairing and them side by side, which is the 97 Donruss Preferred Precious Metals and the 98 Donruss Preferred Precious Metals Gold. What can you tell us about these two?
Yeah, I mean, so again, there's no numbered on those, right? But the print runs on these, I think it's like 150 and 100 on one and 50 on the other or whatever, right? These were kind of like, I feel like almost like hinting at precious metal gems in a sense. Now, I don't think aesthetically so much, right? But obviously it's got it in the title and everything like that. And these cards, I think, are just absolutely stunning cards, with in hand especially. But again, just hard to find, right? And really some of the most, before the wave of PMGs and Rubies and all that stuff, these are some super sought after sets and cards for your guy, right? Because they're just so hard to find. And so I once owned both of these, and I just recently acquired them, about a month and a half ago, again, just because I felt like they were necessary in the set of my collection to tell a complete story of some of where these other cards come from too,
Do you have a preference on, so I look at these two cards. One of them, Bonds, appears to be, throwing from the outfield. The other one, he's sliding. We talked about the Gym Masters where he's mean mugging. Obviously, like, Bonds is known for, crushing the ball out of the park. Do you have a preference on like the action shot?
I honestly, I never know what they're thinking of, like, not just Bonds in general. I just always like, what are they thinking when choosing some of this stuff, right? Like, are they like, you have to pick A or B, and they're both like, just like for instance, a couple ones like Bonds molten metal, which I love molten metal in general. Like, I think that the Jordan molten metal is just like one of my favorite cards, right? But the Bonds one, it's like he's kind of leaning back, he's kind of like fielding, and it's like, couldn't we have done something like that? Like the McGuire of that card is him like fielding it, and it's like, dude, imagine like one arm on that card, right? And even like the 98 platinum medallion Bonds, he's kind of fielding it in left field or whatever. So of course, I don't mind action shots with him fielding it. Like, there's some good ones where he's really leaping or something like that, right? But yeah, him swinging a bat, right, or whatnot. I think like the Essential Credentials one do a pretty good job of showcasing that. Yeah, because I would say both of these, like for instance, these two, right? Like the one on the left with him throwing, it's so casual. Is he throwing it like, is this a warm up throw? And then the
Bonds is not a casual player at all.
Yeah, the one on the right is a little bit better, but it's still like sort of like a tweener, or something. But I don't know. You can't pick them, right?
No. Okay, you talked about platinum medallion. Here's like a 4-pack here. So you want to talk about these?
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody like ultra photography is always fantastic, right? I used to own a 98, the base one, and then I got rid of it. I can always acquire that one. Again, it goes back to like my not being like my favorite action shot of that, and so like I got the 98 Ultra Pizzazz because I actually think that action shot is kind of badass, like he's full sprint running, tracking it down. And you've got Pizzazz, which I think is such a 90s sort of thing to sort of brand on a card, right? Even though it's an old-timey word, right? But it's just a very 90s thing. The 99 Ultra action shot is absolutely freaking amazing. The guy's about to clobber the ball. I forget who has it. Run with the Bulls has the masterpiece of it that I would absolutely would love to own one day.
Amit, he's sneaky, man.
I know, seriously, that guy, right? Him and Pac just seem to have it all.
Oh goodness.
But so I love that action shot, and then I would say like even like the 2000, it was more of just like, what, I'm just gonna like might as well sort of complete some of this run. And then like the 2001 Ultra, just great action shot. There you go. That's a fielding one that I think is badass,
Totally. Okay, talk about maybe gold label here. You've got the class 2 from 99, 1 of 1.
Yeah, so gold label is I think I mentioned it to you. It's always kind of tough to sort of collect. The same with Flair, showcase, right? Just because it just gets so muddled up because of so many rows and everything like that. And they're just absolutely beautiful cards, though. I mean, the presentation of both those releases all years too are just absolutely stunning, right? So, I thought it was just important to maybe to have one just representing it. Like, I used to own a lot more Bonds, Flair Legacy Showcase, Legacy Collection cards, and then I kind of got rid of them because I can readily kind of find those, right? And I really, one of my top sort of wants I would love to have a masterpiece from the inaugural 1997 release, right? I think when you're collecting these type of cards from Gold Label and those, right, I think firsts are probably the most important, right? So don't get too carried away with the 98 and 99s and all that stuff. But I mean, what can you say? It looks beautiful. He's running, he's hitting. I mean, You know, you got the SF logo in the back. I mean, you know, nothing's too busy. I think it's a beautiful presented card, you know.
Totally agree. How about this artist proof gold from 98 Pinnacle?
You're gonna actually pull up some heavy hitters.
Yeah, I'll get there.
So I didn't think I ever needed this card, right? But I'll tell you, like it has been stunning to sort of own this thing, right? You know, I think it's a cool action shot. I think the Dufex sort of shine on those things are really cool, and they're just really tough to find, right? You know, I think they're, um, uh, again, it's sort of like one of those earlier sort of sets that kind of get overlooked that I think will probably rise in time, right? You know, because they're beautiful cards. Yeah,
Okay.
those are
Sorry.
that's just a ghost. We don't need to talk about it too much. Starting 9 cards are
I've
absolutely
never heard of it or seen it. I'm not a baseball guy, so
totally,
that's why.
and yeah, and you know, there's many reasons why the Flair Tradition cards are probably not as popular. They have some, you know, obviously the numbered ones, the vintage classic stuff. But anyways, the starting 9s, like they are impossible to find for the most part, right? So like if you are a player collector or whatever it is in baseball or whatever it is from the 90s, like finding your guy in this set is just like it's just cool to put that, you know, that nail in that sort of coffin on that, you know, because you probably won't have too many chances to find that. Show what you want, Brett. I don't care.
Go for it.
Now, what else? What do we got? This?
That 99 credentials now.
Yeah. I mean, just you know, if you're a fan of 90s, you've got to sort of collect essential credentials, right? You know, I think, you know, obviously starting with 97 and 98 is no doubter. But yeah, so the now is numbered. What is that? The 24, I think it is. So just super hard to find, right? You know, and I think it's a beautiful card. It's Bond swinging. You know, I don't know if he's in pain or he crushed it or whatever it is, but you know, it's just a rare, scarce card that, again, if you're a player collector, I think it's a must.
Do you have a favorite credentials?
It's tough because I love the you know, the 98, you know, which is a beautiful card, right? You know, that one, right? You know, I mean, how can you not? I mean, it looks like he's just spitting on it, turning on it, right? And he just drilled it, you know, and the colors of it is fantastic. But that 97 is also a really that swing with him open like that. I mean, it's a beautiful EC. I mean, what are you talking about? And that doesn't really pick it up as well because the sky, you know, in the background or whatever it is. But like, I don't know, those two action shots are pretty amazing, right? You know, and that and really, go ahead.
The 98, if like,
yeah,
as an outsider looking in, it feels like the 98s across all sports is the most desirable. Is that accurate?
Yeah, of course. Like I'll tell you right now, the one card that I'll probably, I mean, I have some ideas of who owns one, right? You know, but like the Bonds 98 EC now, it has to be like it probably, besides maybe the 99 Metal Universe PMG Gem Masters, maybe because of how popular this release is across all sports, the Bonds 98 EC now numbered to 2 is probably, it might be his best card. And
have you seen this card?
I have seen it. Yes, I because it did transact hands privately, I think a year and a half ago or something for 6 figures. But I if that card became available, you know, set out your bat signals or whatever it is, there'd be a lot of consolidating. I'd have to call my buddy Mark at Fund Your Cards to figure out this one because that would be the major grail for me.
What is consolidating like? What does that mean to you? Because you've got like got so much stuff. Like when you go to Judgment Day, like what's the first area that gets, you know, put on the shelf?
So tough. I mean, it's always tough, you know, especially at first. And again, shout out to Mark and even Nick and stuff, because who I've done numerous consolidating things through their efforts, and those guys are fantastic on both sides. You need people like that, right? I wouldn't be anywhere close to having the collection I have without those type of people. And the other beauty thing, it's not so much that I don't have the financial capability so much to buy these things sort of outright. It's mainly it's two things. It mainly allows me to have the flexibility. I can't tell me how many times I funded a $40,000, $50,000 card, but then went out and because it just became available, went out and bought a $20,000 card of my own, right? Just because I have that flexibility. It's not like I'm just chunking down 60, 80K now, right? And the other thing that I really love is it's helped me really focus in on what my collection is going to be about, right? So, having to consolidate into bigger cards or different cards or whatever thing, it helps you to reevaluate again what's important to you, right? And so there isn't so like a go-to chopping block thing, right? Because it's all tough for me in terms of what to cut, because there's a reason I bought it in the first place,
Sure.
right? And so, I mean, sure, there's probably things that are more obvious than others. But again, I think it really helps drive a more focused and more enjoyable collection to me when you're forced to like, hey, dude, you got to pay for a card by selling cards. So you've got to figure out what is most important in your collection, right? And that constant process of that is really refreshing. I think that's something, even though it's so painful because you'd like to keep it all, it's refreshing because it just kind of gives you new life. Because not only you consolidate it into that different card, but maybe your focus on what is important is starting to be like becomes more clear, or it shifts or something like that, right? So, yeah. But yeah, so if the EC now, it would be because I think it's it's probably over 200 grand or something like that. I don't know where it is, but it's probably something pretty hefty. And I'd do a lot to get that card.
How about this one, huh?
I mean, ridiculous, right? I mean, I absolutely adore 24 KT Gold. I think if Jordan was in the set in basketball, these cards would be even more astronomical. This card is just a stunner in hand. It's numbered to 24. Bonds is, again, tracking. The B for brilliance works well with Bonds too, right? Which is sort of like an after thing.
I never even thought about that.
It's just these cards are tough finds, man. And I love the set. I've amassed a decent amount, and there's more I'll post later on and stuff like that. But just like sets like this for baseball, this type of set, your 99 Rubies, which I think is. So both of these sets are so great to showcase especially if you like a wide range of players, like these checklists are pretty long, right? So you can really find, and they're beautiful cards, right? So it's not like you're just like, here's a random card of a guy I love watching growing up, right? And there's also continuity with the collection too. But yeah, like the 99 star Rubies, which I have a ton of.
What makes dupes acceptable for you? Because you've got 2 copies on the screen here.
So I don't anymore. Like,
okay.
I'm actually, it's funny because like the goal for me with dupes and really dupes mostly for like a bonds is to try to keep it off the marketplace, to be honest. I'm just like,
sure.
I think the card is beautiful and I love owning 2 copies of it. But it's also just like I hate seeing it, and obviously, which sucks is now I'm transacting it. But I hate that sort of thing, right? Like for instance, the 24 KT, I have a PSA 9 copy, but I also had a PSA 8, and I was really struggling to get rid of that. But it went to a good collector, Dennis. What's his name? Dennis Zander or whatever it is. Anyways, his collection, like. I know he appreciates it. I feel good about that, right? So for me, sometimes I'd take less on some of this stuff if I know it's probably not going anywhere, right? Just because I just don't like to see it get in that sort of flipper vortex and you're just seeing it kind of constantly, right? Because because in the mindset if you don't know these sets and don't know about them or whatever, these things don't come up that often,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they shouldn't. They shouldn't. They should be adored by a collector or somebody, right? For a good amount of time. Now, I don't care. Obviously, I'm not on the mindset. Like I don't care what your collecting style, even if you're some sort of flipper or whatever it is, right? I think we get too caught up on what these definitions are and everything like that. But I think cards like this are super special, and just if I am giving up a duplicate, I'm just hoping it's going to somebody who's really gonna just hang on to it for a bit,
Is there anything that, like, I know you've got cards on top of cards, but is there any bond specific cards that weren't brought up here that you want to make sure we give airtime to?
Yeah, I think the only, I think this is obviously this card, the PMG, the 98 PMG with the Golden Gate Bridge and stuff, and I mean it's just an important card to own, right? Just from a set that's obviously probably one of the most important ones.
Where would you, to get your perspective, where would you rank like top 3 sets in like that where Bonds' cards are available, 90s cards? Like what would you say in terms of maybe not necessarily your favorites, but like the market in general?
Yeah, so I would say probably this is going to be the most like sought after, because it just stretches non-baseball collectors too, right? And they're gorgeous. And then I would say, I would imagine, his. I mean, look, I mean, these seem to be just expensive these days now, So, for baseball, I think the 24 KTs are starting to really gain some ground on some of this stuff. I mean, I think obvious, like, his just, like the base 99, which are absolutely beautiful too. The Rubies is going to be important, right? But again, it goes back to like, the thing is like, when you look at some of these values and whatnot, like a true, like a real hardcore baseball collector or whatever will probably pay equal to the 24 KT for these 96 Mirror Golds, even though the pool of buyers for this probably is not as much as, say, the 24 KT out there, right? So baseball is a little tricky in that regard. It's the obvious ones, your PMGs, your Rubies, and stuff like that. But these type of ghosty cards, right? And especially if you get like the 93 finest refractor in a 10, right? Even though it's a pop, I don't know what it is, 25 or 40 or something like that. It's impossible. It's hard to find these things, right? And so, so you got to remember, baseball. There's, a lot of these type of collectors have been collecting people like Bonds and Griffey's since the 80s, right? A lot of some of my cards, I this guy out in Pittsburgh collecting Bonds for 40 years, right? And he's just sort of slowly been selling it over the past couple of years to fund his retirement or whatever it is, right? So like, and like he's got them all, right? And that, like, guys like that, there's just people out there who have been collecting these things for a long time. And remember, the pecking order of importance, at one point wasn't so much maybe the PMG or the Rubies or something like that. It was things like the Mirror Gold and your Crusades and things. And those are starting to shift back in focus too, right? So, yeah, it's all fun.
Some of the best Barry Bonds cards you will see. Andy, I'm glad we could get together and do this. Appreciate you sharing your collection. You can follow him at Bye Bye Baby Cards. Maybe next time we'll do like we'll do a deep cut and do like a Mo Vaughn. So get your Mo Vaughn Gym Masters and all the stuff. 24 karat. Get them all ready and
get them all ready. Awesome, man. No, I'm glad we can do this. You know how much I appreciate you. I mean, you are an ambassador to this hobby, and I can't believe, the passion you have for what you're doing is absolutely ridiculous, borderline insanity. So just keep doing this, man. I mean, I'm your biggest champion, and I'm sorry it took so long to get on, just because I hate doing this shit.
You heard it here on Stacking Slabs. Thanks, man. We'll do it again soon.
All right, buddy. Talk to you.